a letter of application for employment as minister of a congregation, to whom it may concern. I understand that a position as pastor is open in your church, and I would like to apply for it. I have some qualifications for the work, and this letter is an honest review of my past service in ministry. I am almost 60 years of age and have been in the ministry for about 25 years. I've never lasted very long in any one place, but once I did stay in a church for 3 years. People say my health is not very good, but I ignore these kinds of irritants and press on anyway, believing my ill health is actually an advantage to keep my big ego in check. I'm a strong leader and have usually wound up in charge of everything that I've done. I'll be frank with you, I'm not always popular and have been expelled from a number of cities where I ministered. But in every case, it was because of a troublemaking opposition I seem to get everywhere I go. I just preach the truth, and some people get angry when they hear it. You may have heard about a time when I confronted the highest leader in my denomination to his face in front of a large church meeting, but he was clearly in the wrong and he backed down. It is that simple. I was right, he was wrong, I spoke the truth as I always do, and truth won the day. I have seldom been able to work full-time in the ministry, so I've usually had employment outside of my ministry to help support me. In some churches, I received no salary at all. Most of the churches I've worked with were small, and all of them were able to meet in a house or a small hall. I'm a good preacher and well-trained in Bible truths, though I often preach longer than people think I should, sometimes for several hours. And you might have heard about that time when I preached all night. I've had some success at new church starts, though some believe my methods are wrong. What I do is I enter a city and find the local religious gathering. I attend there until I get an opportunity to teach or speak. Then I show them how their doctrine is wrong and the doctrine I teach is correct. This usually causes a lot of division, and those who side with me generally split off the original group and start a new church. In case you follow up on my references, you may discover some questionable events. So I need to give my side of these stories. Yes, it is true that I am guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, but that was before I accepted Christ. And it is true that because of several problems since becoming a Christian, I have been put in jail. But most of these were short stays, although I have just been released from a 4-year stint, 2 years in Caesarea, and the last 2 here in Rome. But I've never given up on my faith, even as a convict. Yes, I have been accused of being a troublemaker, but these are false accusations. The real troublemakers are the people who keep following me everywhere I go, stirring up trouble against me. Spiritually, I've had an incredible journey. Early in my ministry, I had another world experience, which I do not even talk about. I heard unexpressible things, and you need not worry about the charismatic influence, for I am a hardliner on that issue, always limiting speaking to tongues to a few at a time. And though I speak with tongues myself more than most anybody else that I know, I never do so in public meetings. in a staff ministry and usually expect a staff as normal. If your church can't pay them, I will figure out a way to have them work directly for me. My staff is generally loyal to me. In fact, I demand it. In my first staff relationship, the senior member of the staff quickly recognized that I was more competent than he was, and he stepped down to the associate role so that I could assume the leadership of our staff. Later that year, the third member of our staff left and abruptly walked out, but I thought at that time that he was probably too soft for the ministry anyway. Eventually, I lost my associate too when he tried to persuade me to bring that young fellow back on staff. He left and started another ministry, though we're all still friends. I've been used to working with a large staff, but I admit that I've had a lot of staff turnover. Few of them stay very long. As to my wife, I do not give any details other than I will be accompanied wherever I go, not by her, but by a physician, a faithful layman who has been with me for quite a while. He's the one who will be moving with me to wherever I go next. I hope you will consider my application. Sincerely, Paul the Apostle. All right, who's ready to hire him? In the scripture that Anna read today, Paul is writing to the church in Galatia, and he is trying to establish his authority. The point he chooses to begin with in order to convince everyone is this: you have heard, no doubt, of my earlier life in Judaism. I was violently persecuting the church of God and was trying to destroy it. He begins with confession. He begins with his own weakness. The fact is that if you would have had a few questions about Paul's job resume, you can rest assured that you would have had company. Plenty of it. There were many people surrounding Paul who did not believe that he exhibited the signs of a true apostle. He was short, weak, insecure, and tactless. He did not work enough miracles, and he was always in trouble, in and out of jail, getting beaten up in public, always rubbing some people the wrong way. Surely God had better taste than that. Surely God would tap someone more like that to serve as a true apostle, and would also offer him a smoother path in life. Paul was undone by their criticism of him, especially since he knew it was true. He was short, weak, insecure, and tactless. He had never denied any of that, and it was as painful to him as it was to anyone else. But being an apostle had not been his idea. It was not as if he had campaigned for the job. God had forced it on him, slamming him to the ground one day and telling him what to do. God had even blinded him so that he could not run away. And that was how it had been for him ever since. By his own count, Paul had suffered 5 public whippings and 3 beatings with rods. He had been beaten with stones once, shipwrecked 3 times, imprisoned more often than he could remember. When death jumped out in front of him, he hardly even flinched anymore. He lived in constant danger. Danger from raging rivers, danger from bandits, danger from his own people, danger from his enemies. He was used to going to bed without food or water and then lying there awake. Not because he was cold and hungry, which he was, but because he was still worried about his churches. No one was more aware than Paul of his weaknesses. He carried around the load of them and felt shame because of them. But the strange thing is, he didn't try to hide them. When it came for time for him to defend himself to the church, he presented them right along with all the rest of his credentials. My husband and I made a trip to Kansas last weekend for a family reunion. The reunion was the day after the May 31st Odyssey of tornadoes and flooding, hail. And it was a rare conversation that day that did not include reflection on the events here in Oklahoma the day before. To be honest, it was numbing. At a certain point, what does one say? I found myself nodding, listening, confirming that it was overwhelming. I tried a little humor, noting that frogs and locusts were sure to follow. But what does one say? And even more importantly, what does one do? But the fact is, even as difficult as May 31st was, we have experienced it on the heels of too many other days of challenge. When we thought there was nothing worse than April 19th, there was September 11th. And when we thought May 3rd was the worst, there was May 20th, only to be followed by May 31st. There are many questions to be asked. What are we to prepare for? What are our limits? How can we come to terms with a place that seems to be filled with so much grief and at times so much unfairness? Barbara Brown Taylor tells a true story about a woman whose life was coming apart at the seams. When one of her friends told her about a silent retreat at a nearby convent, so she decided she would give it a try. She had never done anything like it before. Once she arrived, she received her room assignment and was standing in the dormitory elevator with her suitcase in her hand when a short, plump nun stepped inside with her. The woman pressed the button for the 4th floor. The nun pressed the button for the 3rd floor. And then the nun said, "What brings you to us, my dear?" And the woman spilled her guts. "My mother has just died. I think my father might be an alcoholic. My marriage is falling apart. And I feel like I'm going crazy." Before she could say anything more, the elevator went ding, and the doors opened, and the nun gave the woman a funny little smile. "God must love you very much," she said, and disappeared through the closing doors. God must love you very much. What does that mean? We don't tend to think of a string of catastrophes as a sign of God's love. But that nun was clearly trying to make some kind of connection. I am not even sure I want to know what it is, but I tell you the story because Paul seems to know about it too. Sometimes our lives can be a struggle. Each of us has our own list of difficulties. Each of us. Sometimes we handle those difficulties well, and sometimes not so well. The lists may be different from person to person, but we all have them. Harry Emerson Fosdick wrote about what a strange paradox our life is. We dread tragedy, and yet there is nothing on earth that we admire more than a person who handles it triumphantly. Much as we deplore the hardships and troubles that Lincoln suffered, we know that his quality of character never could have come from ease, comfort, and pleasantness alone. He did not simply endure his tragedies. He built character out of them. Trouble and grief can add new dimension to life. Some people's lives end in defeat and collapse. Others, thank God, can say with Paul, we triumph even in our troubles. Well, I've seen God's people triumph even in their troubles, all over town in recent weeks. I've seen the grace of God in people's lives, even in the midst of death and destruction. Giving food to the hungry, digging through the rubble, rescuing the injured, comforting people, sorting and helping distribute mountains of donations, hospital staffs working to save lives, people caring for other people's children while parents went through the process of seeking help and relief, touching and holding, hugging in yards, caring for animals, serving meals to the weary, scared, and bone-tired people, giving comfort to those who lost loved ones, carrying on with one's duties, but with the additional duty of helping where one can, cheerfully, willingly. And you know where else it has happened? It's happened just a few weeks ago in the Pride Parade of Oklahoma City, as some of you handed crosses, rainbow crosses, to people who thought their God had rejected them, with the message that that isn't the case. And it happened when children in this building put an ink to cloth and made banners and sent them off to a church in Boston. And then children in Boston put ink to cloth and sent it to a church in Oklahoma City. I'm still not sure what that nun was trying to tell the woman in the elevator, but I think it had to do with everything that woman was about to find out. That in the midst of her losses, with pieces of the sky falling all around her, she was about to be more eligible than she had ever been to discover the power of Christ that is made perfect in weakness. And perhaps that is what the writer of the 146th Psalm knew when these words were written. Happy are those whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is the Lord their God, who made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, who keeps faith forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over strangers. The Lord upholds the orphan and the widow. The Lord will reign forever. Amen.